Hey, this is Rob Thompson. Influencers in business is our topic, and our guest is Don Smyle, who has the all-time greatest name ever. You lead the league in that one, pal.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Absolutely. So let me just do a quick intro, and then I'm going to tee this thing up because you got an amazing story to tell. But you really came through the industry primarily. I mean, there's some stuff before that with Marriott and World Sports Enterprises, but NASCAR, auto racing on the production side. It seems like you were in there really during the I guess the sweet spot of the time frame for NASCAR, probably at its height of its popularity. And then you went on. I just think it's amazing that NASCAR never archived any of their pictures, and you're able to archive all their pictures and or images for them. 25,000 images back from the 1950s, and now you're out there in helping others, startups, properties, brands, individual professional athletes with their own marketing brand and strategy. So I think I covered it all, but let's go way back as far as you want to. How did you start off in this industry? What was your first job?
Well, I had been, as you mentioned, working in the corporate world with Marriott Corporation for many years, and I always had a passion and love for motorsports and television as well. And I said to myself, I really want to figure out how I can get into that industry. And so I had just gotten married, and my wife was, nice enough to let me quit my job and move back to Charlotte, North Carolina, where a majority of all of the NASCAR teams are based. And I was lucky enough to actually secure going from working for Marriott in a management position to then going and working for World Sports Enterprises as an intern because I was so passionate about wanting to get involved in that space that I was willing to take that step back and start over again. And at that time, World Sports Enterprises was the largest producer of motorsports television in the United States. This is pre-Fox and NBC, and there were 5, 6 different networks that were involved in covering NASCAR racing. TNN, ESPN, Turner Sports, ABC, CBS, they all had a little piece of the pie.
Mhm.
And World Sports Enterprises was the production company that really produced all of the motorsports for each of those entities. So we were able to go in and produce the actual races at the track and work on feature material that was created that would be shown during the broadcast. So I was very fortunate that I was able to go to work with World Sports Enterprises, an amazing woman that ran that company, Patty Wheeler. She was somebody I consider my mentor. She taught me so much about business and life, and we're still great friends 25 years later. So that's kind of how I got started in NASCAR on the television side. And through that work, I found myself in a position to tell stories related to the history of racing. And I needed assets to tell those stories, and in particular, photographic assets. And this is pre, digital photography and anything really being digitized. And so I would be working on a feature, and I would call an old photographer from somebody who had captured content back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and tell them that I needed content, something that they had to tell a story. And they said, yeah, I probably have it, but it's in a basement or it's in a box, and it's going to take me a week to dig it out. And I'm like, that's not how this works. I really need it tomorrow. And so I kind of started to see a need where the photography side of the business wasn't really being maintained. These individuals were growing older, and many of them had already passed away. And I had heard many times where family members became overwhelmed with the content and didn't know what to do with it. And many times it was thrown away. And it broke my heart to hear that. So fast forward a couple years later, I go to work for NASCAR Media Group, and I'm in charge of helping them transition all of their their video elements from analog to digital format so that the industry could use them. much like I found myself needing the photography. And at that time, we were transitioning all the video elements. And I kept saying to myself, we really need to do the same thing on the photography side. But the folks at NASCAR said, well, we're really not in the photography business. That's not something we're really interested in doing. And so I started to see a need and a niche. And I had become friends with a lot of these photographers and or their estates. And I said to myself, if I could gather all of these resources in one place, preserve them first and foremost so they're available for future generations, but then digitize them and make them available to the industry, I know I could use them, and I'm certainly confident that others would as well. So after I left NASCAR Media Group, primarily for the purpose of starting Smyle Media, I saw a need and a niche, and I said, I really want to do this. And so I left Media Group, started Smyle Media at the time, and started gathering these resources together in one place. I went to, as I mentioned, the families or the individuals themselves and gathered all these resources together and started to catalog them, preserve them. And I will tell you, photographers are really great at what they do, but they're lousy record keepers. And so quite an undertaking. But long story short, we were able to gather up about 250,000 images between several different photographers. And we then created an online photo database, which exists today. And to date, we've digitized about 25,000 images that we then licensed to the industry to partners like ESPN, Fox Sports, Sports Illustrated. I've just recently this week licensed some images to a company overseas in Paris. So we are worldwide. And so you think of us as a mini Getty with a motorsports concentration. And it's NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, NHRA, Can-Am, Daytona 24, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of series that we cover. And so that's been a passion of mine. I want to make sure that content is preserved and available for future generations because it really is a time capsule. Each image captures a specific moment in time that cannot be recreated. And it's important that we, first of all, preserve that, and secondly, be able to share that and tell that story. Because if you don't caption it properly and you don't know what you're looking at, you've lost an opportunity to tell that story. So all those elements are very important.
Talk a little bit about that, because I just think 25,000 images it's just incredible. Where did you start? Was it just someone dropping off a bunch of boxes, and how did you do it? What was your process?
Well, it's interesting because there really wasn't a blueprint for how to do this. So, I spoke to some people in the industry and learned about the technology that was available. And that at that time, it wasn't as robust as it is today. But I was able to purchase some scanning equipment, both flatbed scanners and slide scanners, negative scanners. But you're right. I went to the photographers and they basically said, "Here's the boxes. Here's the binders that house all this material." And some of it was cataloged, some of it wasn't. And so not only was it the process of preserving it and cataloging it, but figuring out what year it was, what track it was, what series it was. So along the way, I'm very passionate about the history of racing and motorsports in general, and I've gathered a lot of knowledge. But a lot of that came as a result of doing this work, because it required me to do a great deal of research to figure out what I was looking at when I saw an image. And how I was going to properly caption that and add metadata to it so that it could be searched. So it was a labor-intensive process. My wife and I we spent 2 months at one point every weekend going to one of the photographer's houses in his basement and sorting through all of his materials and trying to, in some way, shape, or form, organize it so that then I could bring it back and start the process of digitizing it. So yeah, it was a very labor-intensive process, and even to this day, I mean, I've got 250,000 images, but I've only digitized 25,000 of them, and so it takes a long time to do, and you have to be very passionate about it. And it's something it's a lot of work, but I really enjoy it. So it teaches me. I learn a great deal in doing it, and I also know that part of that process is preserving it, and that is something that's very important.
Well, your wife deserves a medal, my friend, for doing that with you.
Totally agree, but don't tell her that.
So, how did that experience build? What were the bricks for the foundation of that experience that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, certainly. It's really been a cumulative journey because, as you know, I mentioned I started out on the television production side, and so that gave me a great deal of understanding about storytelling. And one thing that is prevalent throughout everything I do today is storytelling. Every process that I get involved in, whether it's marketing, branding, sponsorship, activation, it's really about telling a story. You're trying to figure out where are you now, where do you want to be, and what are the steps necessary to achieve that. And so that's really a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like a great story. And so the television side of things really taught me that, and it tapped into the creative side of things, that the creative side of my brain that I really enjoy. So as I moved away from television in the NASCAR space, I got more into the marketing and licensing side. So I was able to then learn a great deal about how to effectively amplify message in a very crowded space when you're dealing with numbers of Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, numerous brands, all trying to elevate their message and try to get and reach the consumer. So the marketing and licensing side was very helpful, and then I transitioned from that into the sponsorship side, working for a team, and I learned a great deal there about what the boardroom entails and what the corporate side is looking at in terms of how they perceive a sports marketing platform and what they're trying to achieve, and the ROI aspects and all the elements that go into a successful program. And so all of these cumulative experiences over the last 20 plus years have really given me a 360-degree view of how the sport operates, and how each of these elements work together to successfully create and execute a program.
I talk a lot about now where even though myself personally coming from a sports and entertainment background and a media background, working with XYZ company who's out there, trying to sell people roofing or ChemLawn, or it doesn't matter what product they're selling, what business they're in. The industry of sports and what you're able to do in your background, for instance, is on the production side, on the marketing side, on the sales side. You've touched almost every piece of it, and that I think brings tremendous value to anybody who's in business trying to reach consumers. And the core of this, as I talk about, what you truly understand is where there's attention and that one-on-one marketing. How do you reach that person? How do you emotionally connect with them if you're a property or a brand to that consumer? And where's their attention in the marketplace? I mean, capturing 25,000 pictures, that's all about attention, right? Where's the need? People are interested in these photos. How do we now get these photos into people's hands? Well, we can't do it by mailing it to them. We have to do it digitally, right? And that's like the building blocks of kind of see, Donna, where you are right now. You have this well-roundedness of everything that you have done, but at the end of the day, the core essence of this is an emotional connection between a product, a service, or an event and a consumer. So,
Absolutely.
so talk about that right now. Like, what is this next phase in your life? Are you going to stay in the sports lane, or are you going to branch out from there?
That's a really good question. I've recently struggled with that because, when you're in a business vertical for so long, you become very accustomed to that, and I really want to challenge myself and find out how I could apply that into a different vertical. and see if I could move outside of the motorsports landscape. Because let's face it, everything you've just discussed and everything that we talked about is applicable to a great number of industries. And so, I was challenging myself, and I wrote a blog not too long ago called "Put Your Career on Random Play," and it was really unique because one day I was sitting here. I listen to music constantly while I'm working. It helps engage my brain and my creative side. And I hit random play on my iTunes, accidentally, actually, and I started hearing all these wonderful songs that I had loved and enjoyed, or I wouldn't have had them in the first place, but I had forgotten about them, and I wasn't really paying attention to them. And I suddenly found myself really enjoying that experience, and thinking to myself, wow, I haven't heard these things in so long. And I started to understand that in the business world, and me in particular, I had kind of done the same thing in my business career, is that I was starting to go down this track where I was engaging the same people, talking about the same things, visiting the same places, doing the same thing repetitively. And while it had been successful and I've had great success, I started to wonder, much like my iTunes, was I missing out on some really great things because I was not, expanding my purview.
Right.
So I really, had to take a step back and look at that and say, is motorsports where I want to be? And in answering that question, the answer is yes. I enjoy motorsports. I'm passionate about motorsports. What I discovered was I need to branch out to other forms of motorsports because there are so many other opportunities in that space beyond NASCAR. And so while I'm not opposed to working in a vertical outside of the motorsports industry, it seems that most of the people that reach out to me and most of the conversations that I have are somehow motorsports related. And so, as you know, if you're going to be successful in anything in life, whether it's business or a hobby or whatever it is that you do, you have to be passionate about that, and you have to really love it. You have to want to get up every day and make a difference. And I've experienced in my own professional career right turns or left turns where I've gone off and done other things that I wasn't passionate about, whether it was because I thought I needed to or because of necessity. And I found I wasn't successful doing that. And I don't want to waste any time working on something that I'm not passionate about, because ultimately I want to bring that passion to others and help them be successful. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that I'm as engaged in that as they are. And so to answer your question, I'm not opposed to working outside that space, but for the majority of my, the businesses that I work with and the clients that I work with all have some relationship to motorsports, and so I'm not going to turn away from that because it's where I live, and it's what I really enjoy.
Talk about kids coming out of school right now with sports management degrees. What's your thoughts on, because it's so different than when you or I were stumbling out of school. What are you seeing now? What are some, I guess, words of advice and encouragement that you would tell them to really be prepared for if they're coming out in May?
That's a good question. There's so many changes in the sports marketing landscape. I mean, obviously, there it's accelerating at a great rate of speed, but it's also contracting in a lot of ways, meaning that there's really a core focus in certain areas. Social media being a huge factor in that. But I would say that you have to be hungry. You really have to want to work hard. There's so much competition in that space. So define what it is that you want to do very clearly. Look at the industry as a whole and figure out where you think you will best fit. And that requires you to do some research and to understand what's going on in the marketplace. And then work really hard to set yourself apart and to penetrate that market in ways that are creative and unique. It's like the applying for a job aspect that you see today, where there are 500 people applying for the same job. So you really have to be creative in how you apply yourself to that industry, and figure out where you think your best opportunity is for success. But also be willing to work hard, be willing to take chances, and listen to others and their advice. One of the greatest things that I experienced in my career was having mentors or people that were able to provide me guidance. And it's invaluable. It really is, because they had that experience. They've been in that space, and they know what's going on. And so don't be afraid to ask questions. It's not seen as a weakness. It's actually a strength to want to find out information that you don't know. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that I made a commitment, because of what I experienced with my mentors, that I was going to make myself available to people to do the same thing. I think it's extremely important that you reach back, even if it's just to answer questions, to give guidance, to make suggestions, whatever it is. I find myself being reached out to on LinkedIn often, and I make an effort to answer every single one of those and to offer any advice I can, because you don't know how that will impact somebody. I know what a tremendous effect it had on my career, and I'm hoping that, anything that I can offer will do the same for those that are coming out right now.
Skill sets. Talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing now as skill sets that are so valuable, whether it's in social media, digital content creation? Talk about what you feel like, if you knew you needed these 10 years ago, or what kids would need right now, what employers are looking for. What are some of those? What's your top three?
That's interesting. It's really all of those things that you mentioned. I think that the industry, as I talked about, has contracted a little bit, in that there aren't really linear opportunities anymore. You have to be a very well-versed individual in the space, and anything that you do now. You have to understand social media, and you have to understand marketing, and you have to understand ROI, and you have to understand all of those elements to be able to successfully provide your employer, or whoever you're working with, the best opportunity to succeed. And so I would say, you can't put blinders on and say, my job is to do social media, or my job is to do sponsorship. Your job is really to find ways to help your clients succeed. And in order to do that, you need to understand, have a very well-rounded understanding of how the industry works. I was fortunate, and you mentioned it earlier, that I've had the opportunity to work in television and marketing and licensing and sponsorship and brand development, and do all these things. And it gives me a great skill set now. But those individuals that are coming out of school now have as many opportunities to learn all of those things as I do throughout that 20-year career, just because there are so many more opportunities in that space now. So I would say the answer to that is really not one thing or two things or three things. It's really all of those elements. Try to give yourself the best opportunity to understand a little bit about everything. It makes you a much more well-rounded employee, and able to make a much more of an impact in the space.
So what's next for you? What are you looking at, and what's that next big thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been working with a new gentleman, George Hamill, who is a professional off-road racer in the UTV series, the Lucas Oil Off-Road Series. And George reached out to me because of something that I posted on LinkedIn. And he said, I want to work with you because I feel like you really understand how to create a brand opportunity, and how to elevate profile and create opportunity in that space. And it was a little bit different, because I've come from the NASCAR background, and this was off-road dirt racing on the West Coast. And George is actually a paraplegic. He's paralyzed from the waist down, but he is more able-bodied than most people I know. He's an amazing individual, and races and wins in the Lucas Oil Off-Road Series. And as I've been working with him, what I've discovered is the additional opportunities that exist in the motorsports space, which we touched on earlier, outside of that NASCAR vertical that I've been in for so long. And what I'm discovering is there are a lot of these series that are somewhat in their infancy in terms of time that they've been around, or in ways that they're impacting the space. And I really see a tremendous opportunity in these areas to apply some of what I've learned from the premier motorsports in the United States, the NASCAR side, and start to bring that knowledge into these other spaces, because there are a lot of top brands that are starting to turn their eyes toward those series and to those areas of motorsports. And there's a tremendous opportunity there. The off-road dirt racing series in America is one of the fastest growing platforms in the United States, and brands are starting to recognize that. And so, what I see is a real opportunity to create, you know, tremendous platforms for some of these brands in this space. There is a really target-rich demographic that's influential in those spaces, and I think that these brands are going to need somebody to help them navigate that landscape and to apply the things that I've learned over the last 25 years in that space to create platforms where they can be successful in reaching consumers. Now, I will tell you this. One of the things that I think is unfortunate in the motorsports landscape today, specifically on the NASCAR side, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen in other areas of motorsports, is we've kind of transitioned away from the fan-based platform. When I got into NASCAR, it was really all of the activation platforms were very fan-centric, and it was based on how do we reach that consumer, how do we engage them, how do we create a call to action for them to go then engage us outside of racing? How do we get them to purchase our products in the store? How do we get them to buy our products, and to become a lifelong consumer of that product? And what has happened is motorsports and the sponsorship side has really transitioned to more of a B2B aspect. And the consumer has kind of fallen down the rung a little bit, and it's all driven by the B2B platform. And how can company Y that is involved in my motorsports platform do business with company X, and how can they then purchase my product, and how can I sell to them? And that's very important. Certainly, it is an important part of that process, but we can never forget that ultimately the fans and the consumers are the ones that provide the ROI, the real measurable ROI, and the ones that are going to buy or purchase your products or services. And so you can have a B2B platform, but don't forget that the fan is really the single most important part of that, and they should always have a robust fan activation platform as part of that program.
Right. All right. So I have to ask, because I've been looking over your shoulder. What do you have? 2 Emmys over there? What is that? What are those 2 awards you have sitting there?
Yeah, actually, those aren't Emmys; they're Tellys.
Sure.
Yeah, they are. I was fortunate to work with a tremendous group of people at NASCAR Media Group, and we produced several series of television shows for the TNN network at the time on some of the greatest happenings in the NASCAR over the last 50 years. And I worked on that project, and our team was nominated for several Tellys, which we won, as you can see. Very proud of that. I also worked on a feature film on the life and career of Dale Earnhardt Sr. After his passing, which was nominated for an Emmy. And unfortunately, we didn't win that. I really wanted that Emmy. As somebody that's in the creative field, if you're in the creative field and you work in television or any creative field, the Emmy is kind of the pinnacle. And it was nice to be nominated, but you still want to win. But yeah, those are things that I'm very proud of, and there are things that I can look back on and remember what a great group of people that I worked with. And that's the benefit of having all of this experience, is that if I don't know or I'm not able to provide a service, I certainly know somebody who does. And I think that's the great thing about Smyle as a business, is I see us as a collective of really really smart, innovative people that can come together on any project. So while I may be the person that facilitates that dialogue with the client, I have a tremendous group of people that I can work with, reach out to, bring into a project, whether it's in the video production side, the brand development side, web development, social media, SEO, whatever it may be. I have a tremendous network of individuals that I work with on any given project, and so that makes us able to really bring to bear all of those resources.
Awesome. So I'm going to bring this back up one more time. I'm going to bring your graphic up one more time. People get a hold of you.
Sure. Obviously, you can reach out to me at the number on the screen there. My email is dsmile@smilemedia.com, all one word. And I also have a webpage, donsmile.com, that you can look at and learn a little bit more about what we're doing, and as well as my LinkedIn profile.
Right. So any brands, collaborators, any more uh, individuals that are looking for help, whether they're working on a startup or whether they're a professional athlete, anybody that needs help in the space, Don, you're a wealth of knowledge and experience. You should tie those two Teddy Awards and you should put them on shoulder pads. So you can walk around the malls with them. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would go over well.
Yeah, I know. It's just another reason for your wife really to think, high things of you. So,
Yeah, no. I've been very fortunate. I've had, as I said, a tremendous group of people that I've worked with over the years, and like any business, you're only as successful as those people you surround yourself with. And I feel very fortunate to have worked with some of the best people in the industry ever. And so I've been very fortunate. A lot of hard work, but I've been fortunate as well.
that's awesome. Well, I'm glad we were able to connect, and you have an incredible story. Anybody that has that many photographs of NASCAR pictures in their basement deserves another Teddy Award for that one. So, thank you so much, Don, for your time and sharing your experience with our listeners and my audience. And anything that I could do for you in the near future, please let me know. You're a real gentleman and a pleasure. And what you're doing with George is amazing, amazing guy, amazing story. So how people get a hold of you, again, if you're listening and not looking on YouTube, it's donsmyle.com. That's SMYLE. So reach out to him. I'm sure he could definitely help you. So Rob Thompson, anything else you want to say to close up?
I just want to thank you for your time. This has been a tremendous honor, and I've really enjoyed it. And if I can return the favor in the future, please let me know.
Oh, absolutely. I know we'll be staying in touch. So this is Rob Thompson, Influencers in Business. Don Smyle, you have been for a very long time. Thank you for sharing your story, and we'll talk to you soon. Please hold on. Thank you again.